Hi guys. Okay, so this is a video to show you how to do the knit stitch. All right, so far we have made our slip knot and we cast on our first 10 stitches. So here we have our needle with our stitches that we cast on. And we have basically two strands of yarn connected to this needle at this point. We have our strand that's connected to our ball of yarn, and then we have our strand in the front, and that one should be in the back because we kept it in the back while we were casting on. And then we have our strand in the front that is our long tail that we use to cast on. So for knitting, we're obviously going to be using our strand of yarn that is connected to our yarn ball. We don't want to use this tail because you'll run out of yarn pretty quickly. So just so you don't confuse the two, it's always a good idea at the beginning to just kind of snip this a little bit shorter and discard that yarn so that we don't accidentally knit. So we can tell the two apart so we don't accidentally knit with that tail. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our needle that we have our stitches on, and we're going to place it in our left hand. And remember, we always want to have either our stitches or our work that we've done so far on the right of the needle. So right now it's just kind of the bottom of our stitches. We want to make sure that those are facing to the right. And we are going to take our other needle, excuse me, and we are going to start by inserting our right needle into the first stitch on our left needle. We're going to do this by going under the stitch and crossing it behind our needle. So our right needle goes under the stitch and crosses behind our left needle. And now this is where it can get a little bit tricky, and this is where everybody kind of does things a little bit differently. As you practice and as you do this, you'll kind of figure out what's most comfortable for you as far as how you hold the needles and how you hold the yarn to maintain tension. And everybody does that a little bit differently. So it's one of those things that you can't really teach. You just kind of have to keep practicing and keep working, and you'll kind of figure out, okay, this is what works best for me as far as how to hold the needles, how to hold the yarn. So if you can, though, you want to try and hold both needles now with your right hand. So if you've got your right needle in your right hand and you want to use your right thumb and your right forefinger to kind of hold on to that left needle while you do the wrapping, that's always good. They're big needles, so you can also usually kind of position them like against your lap or, you know, against your body to kind of hold them in place. So that usually works as well with needles this size. Okay, so now what we're going to do, now that we have our needle in to that first stitch, is we're going to take the yarn with our left hand. We're going to take the yarn that's connected to our ball of yarn, and we're going to cross it over, and kind of between the two needles, we're going to cross it over our back needle, over our right needle. Just like that. Do that one more time. So we're going to take it, and we're going to cross it over the back, kind of between the two needles there, like that. Okay, and we're going to keep holding on to this yarn with our left hand, not too tight. You just want to have some tension there so that it doesn't just kind of come loose. So now what we have here is we have on our left needle, we have our first stitch that we inserted our right needle into. We have our right needle under that stitch, and then we kind of have this new loop of yarn that we've wrapped around our back right needle there. And the goal here is to pull this new strand of yarn, this new loop, down and through our original first stitch, and that will create our new stitch. So basically we're just kind of in the process of knitting. You're transferring your stitches back and forth between the two needles and creating a new row each time. So what we want to do is we want to pull this stitch, this yarn that we just wrapped around our right needle, down and through, and this can take some maneuvering. It might help to put your forefinger of your right hand on that yarn that we just wrapped lightly while you're kind of pulling the needle down and through so that you don't lose it. And you kind of want to just like pull your needle back, use your tip to keep hanging on to that yarn. And so now we've pulled that loop of yarn down and through our original first stitch. So we've essentially created a new stitch, and now what we need to do is we need to discard the old stitch. So once you have that loop pulled through and securely on your right needle, you just take that old stitch and kind of pull it up and off the left needle. Okay, so let's do that again. We'll go all the way down the row. So we're going to insert our needle into, I'm going to move my tail is in the way here. I'm going to move that out of the way. We're going to insert, making sure that we're still using our yarn that's attached to our ball of yarn. We're going to insert the needle under the next stitch and behind the left needle, cross it behind. And then we're going to, oops, sorry, my camera's moving a little bit there. We're going to wrap our yarn and then put our finger on it to kind of hold it lightly in place and pull our right needle and pull it through that stitch. And now once we have that second stitch securely on our right needle, we can discard the original second stitch. Okay, so let's keep going here. Going to insert our right needle into that third stitch. We're going to wrap, lightly hold it, and pull our right needle, excuse me, down through that third stitch. Once it's securely on there, we discard our old stitch. And we're just going to keep going down the line. So insert that in, wrap, and pull that new stitch down and through our old stitch, and then take the old stitch off the needle. Insert the right needle in, wrap, hold on to it a little bit to keep it in place. Use the point of your needle to pull it through, and once it's on, discard that old stitch. And we just keep going down the line, doing that same thing. Oops, see there I just lost my stitch. That's a good time to explain what to do if you don't keep that new loop on your hook. So basically, if you go in and you wrap and you're coming down, you accidentally slip it and it falls off, just reinsert your needle under the loop and try again. Don't pull your old stitch, don't discard the old stitch until you have your new stitch securely on your right needle. Wrap, put our finger there to hold it lightly in place, pull it through, make sure it's securely on there, and discard the old stitch. Insert it in, cross it over the back, wrap, pull it through. Once it's securely on, discard the old stitch. We'll do the same thing for our last two stitches. Whoop, there we go. Last stitch can be a little bit finicky. You might have to hold it in place a little bit. Wrap, pull it through, and discard. There we go. And so now you have made one row of knit stitches, and you'll see that the knit stitch, your work has gotten slightly longer because you've made one row, and you'll see that the knit stitches are kind of below the new stitches on your needle. The knit stitch you just created is kind of below. It kind of almost looks like a little V shape under there. And then basically, since we're going back and forth with the knit stitch, the next row will look kind of like a little bump. See how the back of it kind of looks like a little bit of a bump. That traditional flat knitting that you think of that's just kind of rows of V's is when you alternate a knit and a purl stitch. And we will learn the purl stitch. But rows of knit stitches looks a little bit different. It's an alternating the V stitch then with like a little purl stitch, which is more like a bump stitch. And I like it too. It's kind of got a real squishy texture to it. And so then basically what you're going to do is you're going to take this needle to do your next row, and you're going to put that one in your left hand. And remember, you want to kind of flip it around so that your work, the stitches you've already created, is to the right. You can take your yarn that it's connected to your yarn ball and kind of pull it behind so that it's ready to use for your next row. And then we're going to do the same thing in the next row that we just did with the last row. So you're basically just going back and forth from needle to needle, creating new rows of stitches and discarding the old row. So same thing, we go through our first stitch, we're going to wrap, pull our yarn through and discard that first stitch. And now you've started your second row. We're going to go through, wrap, pull it through, discard our old stitch, go into our third stitch, wrap, put our finger on to hold it in place. We'll keep holding it back here for a little bit of tension, pull it through, discard the old stitch, the next stitch, wrap, pull it through, discard the old stitch, and just keep going down the line doing the same thing. And that's basically what knitting is. It's just going back and forth, letting your work get a little bit longer. And eventually you might find that you can just kind of hook it and pull it through. Use your needle once you kind of get used to the motion of it. You want to try and keep your stitches not too tight, but after you make each stitch, you do want to maybe give it a little, tug to make sure that they're not too loose either. Like I said, tension will come with time, holding your yarn to get a good tension. And then through our last stitch. Okay, there we go. So now we have, once again, our work has gotten a little bit longer. We've created 2 rows now of knit stitches. And at the end of each row, I probably should have mentioned this at the end of the first row, but at the end of each row, you want to count your stitches to make sure that you still have the same number of stitches that you started with. So we started with 10, so we should ideally still have 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a good way to make sure that you didn't drop a stitch or that you didn't pick up an extra stitch so that your work doesn't get shorter and longer or come unraveled. So that's the knit stitch. So just keep practicing your slip knots and your cast on and doing short rows of going back and forth with your knit stitch. Don't worry about making a project right now. Next time we get together, we'll work a little bit more on all 3 of these things, make sure everybody has these things all down. And then we can talk about maybe casting on for a small project, maybe a cowl or a dishcloth or something like that, or a scarf. Okay, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email or shoot me a text, and I will see you guys soon. Okay, bye.